This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
Welcome back to Black Market Leadership. I feel like I've been gone for a while. Apologies. Been very busy with the site. And if you haven't seen the site, oh my gosh, you got to join it. Look, free memberships, blackmarketleadership.com. We got some courses. Oh my gosh. Gamification. It's very exciting. It's very exciting stuff. So if you get a chance, roll over to the site. If you give me some feedback, please, I'd love it. If not, join it and follow some courses. We got some great courses on using streaming services, Ford versus Ferrari, The Founder, Moneyball. And we have People versus OJ, 25 hours of that. And plus we have actual courses, basic planning, purposeful communication, really cool stuff. But besides that, I'm excited because today, I think with this podcast, this is going to be fun. Now, some of you know me and some of you do not, but if you don't know me, you know that one of the things I've done in my past is I've used computer war games as an educational tool. Now, when I say war games, I do not mean Call of Duty. I don't mean like the shoot 'em up games, but I mean what we call RTS, real-time strategy. And in a sense, it's like Risk. It's like Risk on steroids, where you're responsible for creating a nation. There are different resources. You have to create civilians. You have to go dig up those resources. You have to build armies, and you just have to occupy space. You got to grab, provinces, territories, and you build up your military and your economy and your nation, and vice versa. It goes back and forth. And one of the things I do is I bring it to executives. It could be frontline managers, executives, but the goal is to educate people on how to strategize, how to lead under pressure. And I would tell you right now, it's one of the most fun things I've ever done, and it is the most powerful thing I've really ever done. And what I mean is, in leadership development, you have theory and you have practice. When you read theory, when you read books, you're necessarily reading theory. The question is, how do you know if what you're reading is true? Well, you have to live, you have to experience, you have to actually put those concepts or principles or steps, procedures, whatever they are, you have to put them in practice and actually gain the experience and prove it for yourself. Well, when you do these computer simulations as groups, I think you're really accelerating your learning and experience curve. You really are, because what's happening is you're gaining, I'm talking about, it feels like years worth of knowledge and experiences in just in a couple of days, just working together under the stress, planning, leading, communicating, all this simultaneously while your competitor is doing the same. You think, or you assume. So today I want to talk to you about, there's a common denominator that I've seen in doing these war game simulations. And this actually goes back to an article I wrote a long time ago, but it's called When Executives and Teens Play War Games. And what's so interesting about this, just at the outset, is that, when you look at stuff today about the generations, millennials, Gen X, even, baby boomers, it's all about the differences, how they all differ from one another. And it's very interesting. But when I wrote this, I was focusing on the common denominators. How are they, besides breathing and eating, sleeping, how are they actually related? And you would be shocked when you put, 50 to 60-year-old executives in one of these simulations. And you put I'm telling you, I've worked with 15-year-olds to up to 19 or 20-year-olds. I mean, literally teens, 15 to 19. When you put them in these simulations, you see there's some enormous common denominators, and you'd be shocked. You really would. And that's why I want to talk to you today. Tell you some of these common denominators and why I think they exist, and how they're not about generations. A lot of them are really about behaviors. But it's a lot of fun, and I think it'll be really fascinating. So with that, let me give you some background. I told you I've used these war games, and they use RTS. And what we do is I would go to a team of executives, and let's say they want to create a strategy. And I have a strategic template that I use. It actually mimics the game. So we'll bring a team, let's say bring a team of 10 people in. And there's different roles, and you have people who play the computer, and these are really like your tacticians. These are the people on the ground executing your directives. They're the ones who, mine for resources, build the roads, build the buildings, build your army, operate your army. So in a sense, if you're an executive in headquarters, you're giving directives. These people playing computers are the guys and gals on the ground actually making it happen. They're the construction workers creating the building. They're the people inside your retail store operating it. That's really what the people on the computers do. So we call those tactical leaders, because they are literally in the trenches creating or making your expectations a reality, or at least trying to. That's one end. That's in the trenches. Now, on the very far end, on the opposite end, is what we have, what they call the commander. That's the person who is responsible for the success or failure of this mission. This person is the CEO, and what we do is we'll put that person in a different room where they can't see the game. They might be able to hear it, but they can't see it. And they're responsible for winning. And the question is, how can you win a game, a simulation, where you're given a mission and you have a staff that comes back and forth to you? But how do you stay out of the trenches? This is one of the things that really just trips up so many executives, is that they get stuck and mired in the tactical weeds of everyday business. And instead of looking up and driving the big picture, they're just drowning in detail, and they're putting out fire after fire. And that's one of the benefits of this kind of simulation, this kind of experience, is to understand that it is possible to drive the big picture, but you have to know certain ways to do it. And that's obviously what I show them in here. So again, going back to the roles, you have the tactical leaders on the ground. You have the commander, which is at the real strategic level. They're the ones really separated from execution. Now, how does the commander really talk to the tactical leader? Well, one rule is you can't talk to them directly. You have to have a staff. And this is where the other elements of the team come in. So let's say, again, we have a 10-person team. We have four people on the computer, and we have one person as a commander. That leaves 5 remaining to be a staff. Now, what does a staff do? Now, a staff can plan. They can do intelligence work. They can do design work. What's your nation going to look like? What are you trying to accomplish here? And these people go back and forth between the commander, and they take the commander's, their intentions. They take the strategy, and they actually plan it, prepare it, do the kind of intelligence work, information work that lets people see what's out there on the battlefield. Let's see what the competitors are doing, what the landscape looks like, what their market looks like. And that's really how the commander actually communicates between that and the people on the ground on the computer through their staff. Because what happens is, I will bring the commander into a room, and I will give that commander a mission. And I'll give an example. Remember, we're playing real-time strategy. So we're playing a game that you could build up to 1,000 pieces, 1,000 units. That could be one civilian. It could be an infantry soldier. You could build, just houses. And literally, it would take you minutes to walk. I think I'm exaggerating, maybe 1 to 2 minutes to walk. If you have one guy walk across the map to one side or the other. So the maps are huge, and they're made on purpose. So that's what they're working with. I'll take that commander to a room and give them a mission. And that mission will depend on what the company wants. So, for instance, real basic leadership lessons. I might make it the Revolutionary War. And what I mean is, what that does is you put them on the ground, and they have, you have these guys, these soldiers with muskets, and it's just army. It's all it is, just army. You have infantry, you have artillery, you have cavalry, you got your civilians, and that's really simple. In a sense, it's one dimension. Sometimes, if you want to really get an advanced education, and not just in leadership but management, you can complicate it. You can throw water in. We throw water in. Now you have to deal with ships. Yeah, so you have limited resources, limited time, and the question is, how do you design your force, and for what purpose? So that's just some context. But I'll come in and I'll give this commander a mission. I'll say, okay, this is the Revolutionary War. The year is 1780. We are in the state of Virginia on the east side, and we have recently entered this new province. And intelligence reports that the British have entered the opposite side of the province. Now I'm telling you, as the audience, this always happens. That the computer is always on the opposite side. So I'm giving them this kind of situational information. Then I'll continue with the commander. I'm like, okay, in order for us to continue the war effort, we need to increase the supply of gold to the federal or to Washington, to Philadelphia, the capital of the colonists. We need to increase our shipments of gold. Therefore, by increasing this gold, we are increasing the chance of winning as a separate nation. And now go into the mission. And I'll say, here's your mission. Capture 90% of the gold on the eastern side of the map no later than 45 minutes from now. And as I'm saying this, the commander, the person in charge, is writing this all down, writing it down. And then I'll go into just some recommendations. Here, I'm your boss. Here's my commander's intent, what they might call. Here's some recommended ways of doing this. Here are things you look out for. Do you have any questions? And they're writing this down. And some people will ask questions. Some people don't. No. I'm like, all right, your mission starts in 30 minutes. And then that's when they call their staff in. And they tell the staff, and the staff now listens. They're writing it down. And simultaneously, while this is happening, one of their intelligence officer is running out to the computers to look at the map, and they're drawing the map on a piece of paper because remember, the commander can't look at the computers. So this intelligence officer runs back in, we have a big whiteboard usually. They'll draw the whole map that person sees on this and start placing where the enemy's at, where they're at, where our forces, where the resources. They really make the eyes for the commander. And of course, the question is this information true? Does the commander even check to see if their staff officers are being accurate or not? Or are they just rushing because of the situation? Again, these are all great examples of leadership and management, especially if you want to fail, if you want to learn from failure. This is a great safe place to do it. And a lot of people do it. So that's really kind of the gist of this. And what happens is during that 30 minutes, they will build I'll say, if you're going to capture the gold, as I said earlier, 90% of the gold, the Eastern map. Well, one question you should ask is, what is the Eastern map? What does that look like? If they don't ask, and guess what? They're not going to know my specific directions. So if they do ask, I tell them, and I'll say, here's this line. It's right here in the middle. Everything east of that is considered Eastern map. 90% of the gold, you got to capture it. And they should ask questions what that means. I'm like, look, you can do it there's really two extremes. You can find either way or find somewhere in the middle. You can build a wall. You could build a wall from the very top to the bottom, which would be very costly, but you could do it, build a wall to prevent the enemy from coming in. And then everything east of that wall will be yours. Or you can build several military units, several armies, as I call them. And I give them metrics of how to measure that. Is it 50 people or is it 100 people, 100 soldiers, I mean? And once they do all these things, then I've given them options. And once I leave and they bring their staff in, then they choose exactly what they want to do. And some people, you'll find some behavioral profiles, which are very, very dominant, very take charge, and usually very combative. And guess what? Those make armies. Some people not only make those armies, but they'll go out and just try to destroy the enemy. Because if you destroy the enemy, then your gold's safe, right? So you'd be very surprised at the range of options that people will choose given their behavioral profiles of what they really want. Some people, by the way, are cautious, more detail focused, and they will go for the long solution. They'll build a wall. They'll build a long wall. But one thing they don't realize is that, building that wall in peace is a dream. The enemy is always going to attack you. So there's always some emergency popping up. And what's happening is they're actually learning how their decisions are based on their behaviors and how their behaviors are affecting their decision-making and even their style of strategy, their type of strategy they choose. So in a sense, that's really it. Once that time starts, after they've planned to get everything in place, the game starts. And they have a certain time to win. And I go back and forth and I give them pointers, or I say, I'll bring people in, I'll ask questions. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Again, it's just ways for me to point out different methods, different ways, practices that they could be using to have better control of their team when friction and the fog of war comes and actually just upsets their plans, which in life it always does. So that in essence is the whole process of using these games, of these simulations. And you can probably guess after each simulation, we'll spend probably an hour and a half doing a back brief or excuse me, an after action, talking about why you did this, why did you do that, asking the team, what did you think? Why were you doing this? Why didn't you follow the strategy as prescribed? And boy, the breakdown of communication, the understanding, the interpretation of words, of plans, it all comes out. It really does. So that's the process. And now the question is, how do executives and teens, how do they react to this process? Or more specifically, what are the common denominators that unite them? What are the common denominators between a 50 or 60-year-old man who's been in corporate America 20, 30 years, maybe 40 or 30 years of his life, versus a teen who hasn't even been to college, but who may be a little game savvy, may know what they want, but they have hardly any life experience at all. What are these major common denominators? And we're going to jump into that next. Okay, the first of four common denominators that really unites executives and teens is complexity. Boy, people like complexity. They sure like complex stuff. Complexity as opposed to simplicity, more often than not, characterizes the entire planning process. Whether you bring in this seasoned executive, or you bring in this 17-year-old junior in high school, and they want to make a battle plan. Remember, a lot of these people don't have no military experience, and that's one question I ask: who here is a military tactician or strategist? No one raised their hand. I'm like, great, the battlefield is level, everyone's equal. But one thing that unites them is, boy, people like complexity. I think it's because complexity is seen as synonymous with an appearance either of intellect or even pedigree. Maybe people have watched a lot of these history channels of, the Schlieffen Plan and all these complex military maneuvers, which, by the way, are usually complex maneuvers, can be utter disasters. They're usually not selected as a first choice. They're usually selected in times of emergencies. So it's very fascinating to see how both teens and executives, for some reason, they always gravitate to a complex plan. And the fact is that complex plans nearly always fail. I found that the most successful teams, in the previous simulations, have consciously sought simplicity. They're like, look, let's just make it simple. We're going to go from A to B, and that's it. That's all we're doing. We're going A to B, and we're going to do this. And what you'll find is that people, remember the commanders, as we said, the person who is responsible for the success or failure. I have also found that even in teens, that commanders who are the most successful during these simulations are those who deliberately look at complex situations and they reduce them into their essential elements. And I mean, basically talking off their hands. Look, here's our mission. There's only 2 or 3 things that's being asked of us. The executives who do this and the teens who do this are usually always successful. So I've always found this fascinating. Sometimes they don't use that word essentials, but that's what they're doing. And I mentioned earlier on the website, blackmarketleadership.com, we have a course called Thinking in Essentials, which to me is the core course of 33 modules, which are coming out, another 20, which are coming out. Thinking Essentials is without a doubt the most important because you see essentials in thinking and decision-making and communication and planning, and even in terms of focus during execution. So I just find it fascinating that the teens and the executives who think in essentials, who reduce the complex mission or strategy into its most basic forms, not simplistic, not being naive, but breaking down to what are the 2 or 3 things that really just have to happen, they are really, really successful. And another thing is that when they do that, you find that those commanders, those teens and executive commanders, they don't lose sight of the mission during chaos, because one thing happens during these war games, you'd be shocked. I said earlier how your game starts in 30 minutes. What I didn't tell you is sometimes the computer decides to attack early. So you might have 15 minutes of playing, and that computer attacks, hey, buddy, it's on. I don't look at me. I'm just watching. So chaos always rears its head, and you find that those commanders who reduce everything into their essential elements, they are usually the most successful, or not usually, they are the most successful. Yeah, in fact, one example is I had one high school junior. He was a commander of a team, and this simulation was 1.5 hours long. 1.5 hours long, had 7 participants in it on his team, 7 people. And the game got so complex, there's probably 2,000 computer units. Now I'm talking like a person on the map, 2,000 of those. That could be a person, a tank, an airplane, whatever. They're all moving around. And despite the chaos, despite having a plan, that high school junior reduced the big picture of his mission into 3 subsets: military aspects, economic aspects, and intelligence aspects. Meaning, what are our military goals? What are our economic goals? Meaning, how much money or resources do we need to make in order to supply that military? And intelligence, what are the things that we have to know? And I've seen executives do it, but the fact that a 17-year-old did this was fascinating. It was utterly fascinating. And he stuck with it during the simulation. Very impressive. So I think, in sense, going back, what is the lesson? That complexity is usually for some reason the preferred method of planning, and that's a failure most of the time. But it's those people who think in essentials who become successful. The second element, and this is what I call the noise of strategic execution, becomes the siren song. That's Odysseus. Remember the Odyssey, the siren song. Remember the sirens luring him and his crew to be a tactician. I'll say it again. The noise of strategy execution becomes a siren song to a tactician. And the one of the questions I pose is, who willingly jumps into a field of weeds when the path is clear, although it's narrow and winding? I'm going to say that again. Who willingly jumps into a field of weeds when the path is clear in front of them, although it's narrow and winding? Well, our observations is that both executives and teens do. It just seems to happen. What happens is, when people hear the game and they see the game, and that's what I mean the noise, it's all this visual, perceptual stimuli in front of them. Instead of focusing on the conceptual big picture, the strategy that you have laid out, when they start hearing all the booms of the cannon and the soldiers charging and the musket gunfire, the hundreds of them going off, their mental focus goes to that. Everyone is just entranced by the visuals. And it makes sense. I mean, think about how many hours a day people spend on their phones. You're focused on the picture, on that perceptual stimuli that's drawing you in. And that's why I mean a siren song to the tactician, that it absolutely lures you away. It lures you from the big picture, and it lures you into the weeds of the tactics. So if you're this commander, and like that previously I mentioned, that high schooler who focused on the military, economic, and the intelligence aspects of his larger strategy, that's a big picture right there. What happens is most people don't do that. They might write that out, but when that battle starts, when the commander doesn't see the battle but he hears it, they become just laser focused on the military, on that one aspect. And they become so focused that, guess what? They ignore the 2/3 of that strategy, the economic aspect and the intelligence aspect. So, I think here, this kind of goes back to, and there's a lesson in Thinking in Essentials, and it's called the Crow epistemology. It's a term coined by Ayn Rand. And it's a story about how scientists were studying crows back in the 50s. And the lesson was that all creatures, animate objects, have a certain mental capacity that after a certain amount of information hits your head, it goes inside your head, you can become mentally overloaded. And when you're overloaded, you just absolutely lose focus. So in a sense here, during the wargaming, these commanders who are responsible for the success of the entire mission start to focus on only one of three major subsets of three major dimensions of their strategy. They just become lured into this through the siren song of sound and of the booms and the cracks of the rifle. And to me, this is the great lesson, because this is where a lot of executives get tripped up. How many times have executives just been mired in the daily morass of details? It's extraordinarily hard sometimes to step out of that, but you have to. You absolutely have to. And what you'll find is that most people during these simulations do the same thing, and especially the teens. The teens love the battle, but it's the teens that, and even the executives. If you can explain to them, look, you can be an overpaid battalion commander, or you can be a general. Which one you be? Well, I want to be a general. This is what you do. When you hear that sound, walk away and focus on your strategy map. Focus on your plan. Make sure that you're still messaging your crew, your people out there who are executing their strategy. Make sure this is continual. You are continually doing this. If you do this, you will be successful. If you don't, you're going to fall into this trap of weeds. You're going to trip, you're going to fall, and you're going to lose. And a lot of times they do. So this is another example of these commanders and even teams. They stop focusing on the essentials of the mission, and they just become mired, or they start focusing on the non-essentials of the things that look sexy but aren't going to pay off. So that's it. The noise of strategy execution becomes a siren song to be a tactician. Now, the third thing that comes up, again, this is why these simulations are so fun, and they're so revealing. The third common denominator between executives and teams is that speaking up is uncomfortable, even when your self-interest is on the line. I don't know what it is, but participants, a lot of participants, not all of them, but a lot of them have a tough time breaking out of their comfort zone in respect to communication. And so first, here are two observations. First, you'll find that there are many people who, when the simulations start, and whether they're planning or they're on the computers, especially if they're on the computers, they will become nearly dead silent. They just don't speak up. They might speak up if you're sitting next to them, but outside their immediate group, whether it's the larger team or the entire team that came there as a group to do the simulation, they speak only usually to the person around them. They don't speak up. And sometimes you'll find people who sit next to one another just won't talk at all. They just become so focused on executing their specific task that they actually ignore their larger mission, which is connected to the ultimate strategy. So that's an interesting, to me, that's an interesting common denominator that I've seen both, again, with executives and teams. Second, which is so interesting, when you're playing a war game and you got the cannon booming and the cracking of the rifles and the yelling of the people, you will find that some participants, and again, I've seen this a lot of times with executives, they seem to want permission to be vocal. You're in a goddamn battle and people are getting blown up, and can I talk up? Can I say something? There's an example where we had one team who after I think an hour and a half of going back and forth, they finally had this big army, around 400 soldiers, which is a lot. I mean, it's a big army. They're marching to the enemy camp, and as they're marching, they had to pass through an enemy fence. A fence. All right, people, a fence. And the person who was leading this particular army stopped and actually asked permission to cross the fence. And so that's one example. But the other one was the same person. The enemy army was sending their army towards their friendly base. The army's coming, and this army is a huge strategic threat. And the person who saw it wasn't saying anything, if your house is about to be run over by a bunch of vandals, and you have a family there, I don't think you're going to sit there in silence. You're going to turn around and scream like, Jesus Christ, they're coming. Get your guns. You're going to do something to get people alert, to get your team alert, because you can lose. But in the gaming, what you'll find is that people become so isolated, so siloed, because for whatever reason, they think they're there to do their task, that if they speak up, it somehow disturbs the structure, the piece of the team. They don't realize that they have to speak up, that everyone's self-interest is online here, that, you may be a success on the ship, but if everyone else fails, you're going down with the ship too. So I think sometimes people assume that there is an artificial order, or at least assumed order inside a mission, a given mission or in a team, and that you can't disturb that. Well, yeah, you can. You actually can. It's actually sometimes your duty to do that if the welfare of your team is online. So I think the important lesson here is one thing I've done is you have to make sure that people understand that they have a right to speak up. They have an obligation to speak up if they see things. If you see things, you got to say something. I mean, how many times do you hear that in airports today? If you see something, say it. You got to be vocal. You're not breaking any artificial order. You have a voice. You have a right to do it. And I would tell you, you have an obligation to do it. And if you survive that battle, the enemy comes to your base and you didn't speak up and you survive it, you should be court-martialed. That's how bad it is. You really, it should be well understood that you had an obligation to speak up and you didn't. I think if people take that kind of ownership, they'll be much more successful. But again, within teams and executives, you see the same thing. People become siloed. They don't speak up for whatever reason. And then finally, the fourth element, which to me is this is a great indicator of the success or failure of a mission, of a team. And that is what you'll find is in the first 5 minutes, I will know, as the facilitator, I will know if this team's going to win or fail. I will know it. You know how? How do I do this? Because I go around after I've given the mission, after 5 minutes, I will go around, and after the team's been talking to one another, I'll go around to the people on the computers and I'll ask them what the mission is. This is a tactic that was used on me as a lieutenant in the Army, going around to the squad leaders or people or my commander going to the squad leaders, asking them what the mission is. If they didn't know the mission, that what I'm as the platoon leader was not doing my job. The same thing is here. If I give the commander a mission and they don't write that mission down, or they have the wrong mission, or they don't communicate it, that team is going to fail. And guess whose responsibility it was? The commander. And what you'll find is, especially again with executives or teams, the teams and executives who write it down, the mission, and they ask questions, and then they disseminate that information. They bring in their staff, say, this is what the mission is. Make sure that people on the ground know it and charge them. They assign them to that task. If they do that, they're going to be a success. And why would they be a success? This goes back to that idea of Auftragstaktik, or mission command. The idea is situational decision-making. Look, if you have a plan and you're going to execute it, the fact is that things change in the world. Sometimes you cannot anticipate the future. You're going to have to require people to make situational decision-making. You're going to require them to improvise. You cannot expect them to improvise correctly if they don't know why they're there in the first place. So if you give people the simple mission statement, not a corporate mission statement, but a project mission or an operational mission statement. And if you're interested in that, check out my course on basic planning, blackmarketleadership.com. But if they do that, if you give them that mission, that even if the plan goes to total shit, and even though there is a real fog of war and friction hits, they know why they're there. They hopefully will start talking to one another. They'll start coordinating. They'll start speaking up. So even if you're wounded in the battle as a commander and you can't even take charge, that team should be able to talk to one another, knowing where everyone's going. If they don't, they can make it up as they go. But the end goal, the end mission is known. Everyone then should be aligned. So worst case scenario, they can make it up as they go, but at least they know where they're going. It's the leaders at the beginning. It's the executives and teams who do not disseminate, who hold that information to themselves and let the people on the ground assume what needs to happen. And let me tell you something, if you're listening to this, let me tell you something. When you have a team out there and they're playing these simulations and you don't tell them a mission, you will be shocked when you ask them what they're doing. Sometimes they'll say, I don't know. Sometimes you'll hear things like, well, I'm here to guard this bridge, or I'm here to destroy the enemy, which is completely wrong. And you'll find some behaviors out there which will take advantage of that. They're like, well, I don't have a mission. I'm just going to do what the hell I want to do. And I've seen it. I've seen in corporate America, if you don't have the right mission or the right way to align people, and you're not clear, some people out there will take the initiative and they'll do what they think is right. And oftentimes that's not what you want them to do. So you can imagine what kind of chaos that brings, but it's true. It's true. So, in the end, those are really the four big common denominators. Again, the executives and teams, you find that they seek out complexity and usually fail at it. And the remedy is what? Thinking in essentials. You'll find also that so many of these executives and teams, when the game starts, with all the visual, the sexy stuff, the visuals, the sound, all the things that just really attracts them, lures them as a siren song, lures them to, in terms of entertainment, that they lose focus of the big picture, that they only focus on a third of what needs to happen. And these commanders who should be generals are really become overpaid battalion commanders. It's like a CEO, which just ultimately is so in the trenches that they just become just the head of sales or the head of marketing. That's really it. They're not controlling the whole. They're just focusing on one specific area. That's not their role. The other thing is you'll find that despite, when chaos hits, when friction hits, you got to make sure your people speak up, because when the executives and teams, when the game starts, for some reason, there are people who won't even talk to the guy or gal next to them. They get so focused on their specific task, and they ignore the fact that friction comes, that friction is normal, and that they have to speak up, and they have an obligation and a right to speak up. They're a part of this team. They have to make sure this team is a success, and they cannot assume that everyone else knows it. If they see something, say it. And finally, again, for executives and teams, the executives and teams who identify their mission, they clarify it's the right mission, then they make sure that mission is disseminated to everyone on the ground, people who are responsible for it. When they know that their team knows that what the overall mission is that they're doing, then they have increased the odds of success, because I just said, friction and fog of war are normal. They come in. And when people know what they need to do at the beginning, what you'll find is that people are, have a lot of ingenuity. They will improvise if necessary. They'll make it up as they go, which is fine as long as they know what the mission is. But it's those people on the opposite end who hold that mission, who don't tell the people on the ground. They hold it to themselves and their staff and just assume that everyone knows what they do, what they know, which is always wrong. So it's funny, these lessons of the gaming are just fantastic lessons of leadership and management. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I think next time I'm going to give an actual vignette. I'm going to talk about the Battle of Christmas Island, which is just a fascinating simulation between a group of high conformists, people who are extraordinarily detail oriented, all about quality and how they deal, how they plan, how they decide during times of chaos. It is a fascinating case study. And I think I'll do that next, because I think you'll get something out of it. Plus, I think I need to throw some sound effects, some airplanes and some tanks, some ships. That'd be kind of cool. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening. And again, please head over to blackmarketleadership.com. The site is open, free material right now, free. I mean, we're going to start charging pretty soon, but if you want to get some free content with quizzes, even chances to, if you want to increase, up your resume or CV, I got some really good content in there, probably over 50 hours worth of videos material right now. That's not including quizzes or downloadable PDFs. So head over there. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you a great day and thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile